It started with something so small that most people would have brushed it off, but for me, it was the kind of detail that stayed in the back of your mind like a splinter you cannot quite remove. He came home late that night, later than usual, and as I stood in the kitchen stirring the soup, I noticed a faint smell. Clinging to him, a soft floral scent that did not belong to me. I have never been the kind of woman who wore perfume every day, and certainly not that type of perfume. It was unfamiliar and yet so strong that I knew it had been close to him, maybe even on his skin for hours. I froze with the spoon in my hand, feeling a rush of something sharp in my chest. He smiled like nothing was wrong, kissed me quickly on the cheek, and muttered that work had kept him late. Then he placed his phone face down on the counter and went upstairs without looking me in the eyes. I told myself it was nothing, that maybe the scent came from a coworker who hugged him goodbye. Maybe someone spilled something near him. But the unease stayed lodged inside me. Over the next week, I began to notice little things I had never paid attention to before. His late nights became more frequent. His phone was always on silent and never left. His side? He started keeping his laptop closed even at home, and when I asked how his day was, he gave short, vague answers that sounded rehearsed. I wanted to believe that the man I had loved and supported for years would never betray me, but my instincts screamed at me that something was wrong. For days, I wrestled with the urge to look at his phone. I told myself not to snoop because love should be built on trust, but then I remembered that trust is meaningless if it is being used as a shield for lies. The moment came one Friday night. He had fallen asleep on the couch. With his phone still in his hand, his breathing was deep and steady, the kind of sleep that made me sure he would not wake up easily. I slid the phone out of his hand and felt my pulse hammering in my ears. The screen lit up instantly with a message from a name I did not recognize. The words on the screen made my stomach twist. They were not friendly or casual, they were intimate, personal, the kind of words that should have been mine and mine alone. I opened the thread and scrolled, and what I saw made my vision blur. There were months of messages, dates, and pictures. Proof that this was not a mistake or a moment of weakness, but an ongoing relationship built in secret. I put the phone back exactly as I found it and stared at the ceiling that night, unable to cry, unable to scream. It was as if my mind had gone cold. The man lying next to me, breathing peacefully, had been living a double life, and I realized that confronting him right away would only give him the chance to lie and twist the truth. I needed to be smarter than my pain. I needed to know the full extent of what he had done. From that night on, I began to watch him more closely than I ever had before. I became an actress in my own home, smiling when I wanted to scream, kissing him when I wanted to push him away, cooking his favorite meals as if nothing had changed. Inside, I was gathering every piece of evidence I could find without him knowing. I started memorizing his passcodes, checking his emails when he left his laptop unattended, and taking photos of receipts I found in his pockets. I noticed patterns in his spending and discovered charges for expensive dinners, hotels, and gifts, none of which were for me. Every time I found something new, I saved it in a hidden folder on my own device. Each detail was another brick in the wall I was building around my heart and another step toward the revenge I was quietly planning. One night while he showered, I went through his bag and found a small velvet box. I opened it to see a necklace glittering in the dim light. My heart sank, not because I wanted the necklace, but because I knew it was never meant for me. I closed the box, placed it back exactly as I had found it, and smiled at him when he came out of the bathroom dripping water on the floor. He had no idea that I already knew everything, that I had already seen the messages, the photos, and now the gifts. The deeper I looked, the darker it got. I discovered that it was not just one woman, it was two. Both of them seemed to think they were the only other one in his life. Both of them were being fed the same lies, the same promises I had once believed. My love for him died completely in that moment, replaced by something colder than hate. I wanted him to lose more than my trust. I wanted him to lose his comfort, his pride, his security. I wanted to take away the things he valued most, without him realizing what was happening until it was too late. I began studying our finances more carefully, checking our joint accounts, credit cards, and property records. I learned exactly how much he earned, how much he owed, and where his money went. I kept my own accounts hidden from him and slowly moved small amounts of money out of reach. I began recording our conversations, especially when he spoke about his day, because I noticed how easily he slid between half-truths and outright lies. Each recording was another weapon I could use when the time was right. At night, I would lie awake beside him, listening to the sound of his breathing and thinking about how different things had become I remembered the man I had married, the way he used to look at me like I was the only person in the world. The man I loved was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized, and the worst part was that he did not even realize what he had done to me. He thought he was untouchable, that his lies would never catch up to him, and that I would always be here waiting. That was his biggest mistake. The plan forming in my mind was not rushed. I knew I had to be patient. I had to make sure every detail was perfect before I made my move. I did not want him to just feel guilty. I wanted him to lose everything he had built on lies. I wanted him to see what it felt like when the ground under your feet suddenly disappeared. And as I lay there in the darkness, I promised myself that when I finally acted, it would be in a way that he would never see coming and he would never recover from. The next morning, I woke up before him and just lay there staring at the ceiling. While listening to the soft rhythm of his breathing, I had trained myself to keep my face calm when he looked at me, even though inside I felt like my heart had been ground into dust. That morning was no different. I got out of bed, quietly walked to the kitchen, and started making coffee. My hands moved automatically, pouring the water, grinding the beans, but my mind was somewhere else, somewhere darker. I was thinking about the folder on my phone, the one filled with screenshots of his messages, pictures of him with women I had never met, receipts from places he had claimed he had never been. That folder was my insurance, my proof, my shield. When he finally came downstairs, he smiled at me like nothing in the world was wrong and kissed me on the forehead. He asked about my plans for the day, and I told him I would be running errands and maybe meeting a friend for lunch. He nodded, picked up his briefcase, and left without a second glance. I watched him walk out the door and felt the cold rush of relief I always felt when he was gone, because it meant I could finally think and act without the constant weight of pretending in front of him. That day I drove to a part of town he never went to and met with a lawyer I had found through a mutual acquaintance. I told the lawyer that I was only there for hypothetical advice, but I think he could see through me because the questions he asked were precise and he seemed to understand exactly the kind of situation I was in. We discussed property division, hidden assets, and legal strategies. I asked him to keep my visit completely confidential. He told me not to make any sudden moves yet, but to start gathering financial documents, bank statements, and anything that could show his income and spending patterns. I already had most of it, but I pretended to take notes anyway. When I got home later that afternoon, he was still at work, so I took the opportunity to check the small fireproof safe in our closet. He thought I did not know the code, but I had watched him enter it enough times to memorize it inside. I found passports, deeds, and a few sealed envelopes. I photographed every single page of every document and put everything back exactly as it was. I also noticed a small black notebook tucked at the bottom of the safe. I flipped through it and found that he had been keeping track of cash withdrawals, payments to people I did not recognize, and handwritten notes that looked like reminders for meetings I had never heard about. That night over dinner, I asked casual questions about his day, and he told me another neat little lie about staying late at work to prepare for an upcoming project. I nodded and smiled while thinking about the receipt I had found for a fancy restaurant 2 towns over, dated just 2 days ago. I pictured him sitting there with her, maybe holding her hand the same way he used to hold mine. I wondered if he told her the same lies or if he pretended to be single with her so she would not feel guilty. I had no idea if she even knew about me, and I realized I did not care. She was part of the problem, but he was the source of it all. I started keeping a small journal hidden in a locked drawer in the guest room. This journal was not for my emotions, but for the facts, dates, times, places, amounts. Every detail I could verify went in there. This way, when the day came, I would not have to rely on memory. I would have a cold, unshakable record of his actions. I knew it was dangerous to keep something like that in the house, but I also knew that I needed it close because I could not risk losing even a single detail. A week later, he came home earlier than usual, which almost caught me off guard. I had been on my laptop going through one of his social media accounts that he had forgotten to deactivate. I quickly closed the tab and pretended to be reading an article about home renovations. He leaned over to kiss me, and I caught that scent again, the one that had first tipped me off. It clung to him like a shadow. He looked tired but content, and I realized that he must have just come from seeing her. I felt my blood heat, but I forced a smile and asked if he wanted to watch something together. He agreed, and we sat on the couch with a comfortable distance between us. I could feel the weight of everything I knew pressing against my ribs, but I did not let it show. That night when he fell asleep, I went back to the laptop and looked through more of his messages. I found travel plans for next month, hotel bookings in his name, but with 2 guests listed. He had told me we could not afford a vacation this year because of bills, and yet here he was spending lavishly on someone else. The insult burned more than the betrayal itself. I had sacrificed so much for him, my time, my energy, my dreams, and he had turned around and poured those resources into someone who had done nothing to earn them. I realized then that my revenge had to be more than emotional. It had to hurt him in the places he thought he was strongest: his finances, his reputation, and his sense of control. I began to imagine the moment when all of this would come crashing down on him, when everyone he cared about would see him for what he truly was. I imagined him standing there stripped of his confidence, his charm, and his lies with nowhere to hide and no one to believe him. That thought became my anchor. It kept me steady when I had to smile at him, when I had to listen to his lies, when I had to play the role of the loving wife one last time. As I turned off the light that night, I told myself the same thing I had been repeating in my mind for days now. Be patient. The fall will be greater if the climb is higher. And right now he thought he was at the top. The days after that moment of quiet resolve felt like walking a tightrope suspended over a pit that had no bottom. Every single movement, every single word I spoke had to be perfectly balanced, so that he would not suspect I was planning anything against him. I woke up each morning beside him, forcing my breathing to match his and my face, to remain still even when my mind screamed with the images I could not erase. The image of him sitting across from another woman, smiling the way he used to smile at me, the image of his hands reaching across the table to touch hers, the knowledge that I was living with someone who could so easily turn love into something unrecognizable. I began to create a routine that gave me pockets of privacy to work in silence. I told him I had joined a fitness class in the mornings, and on some days, I actually went just so the story would hold up if he ever checked. But most mornings, I drove to the library 2 towns over where I could sit at a corner table with my laptop and a stack of papers. These papers were bank statements, credit card bills old, utility bills, anything that could help me trace his movements and spending habits. I highlighted the dates and amounts, then cross-referenced them with the messages and receipts I had already saved. My journal was growing thick and heavy with facts. One morning while at the library, I overheard 2 women talking about a private investigator in the area. One of them swore he was discreet and effective. My heart beat faster as I listened without turning my head. I scribbled down the name, and that afternoon I called the number. I kept my voice calm and told him I needed to verify some details about a spouse. He asked if I had proof already. I told him I had enough to start. He agreed to meet me at a small diner off the highway. When I met him, he was older than I expected, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He listened without interrupting as I told him my suspicions and then showed him the evidence I had gathered. He nodded slowly and said he could follow my husband, discreetly document his activities, and provide photographs if necessary. I agreed to his fee and gave him a set of my husband, his recent schedules and known hangouts. For the first time in months, I felt like I had someone on my side, someone who understood the value of patience and precision. That night I made dinner as usual, and we sat across from each other as if nothing had changed. He told me a story about a difficult client, and I laughed in all the right places. But inside I was wondering if the investigator had already started tailing him. I imagined the photographs being taken, the truth being captured in a way that no one could deny. The thought kept me steady as I listened to his lies and watched the way his eyes darted just slightly to the side when he spoke. A week later, the investigator called. He said he had something for me, and we agreed to meet in the same diner. This time he slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were photographs of my husband holding hands with the same woman I had seen in the earlier pictures. There were also shots of them checking into a hotel together and leaving. Hours later, he had documented the times, the dates, even the room number. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pictures, but I kept my face calm. I thanked him, paid the rest of his fee, and tucked the envelope into my bag. When I got home that day, my husband was in the living room watching television. He looked up and smiled at me with the same face that now felt like a mask. He had no idea that the walls were closing in on him piece by piece. I felt a rush of satisfaction, but I kept my voice light as I asked about his day. He told me another neatly packaged lie, and I nodded, pretending to believe it. Every lie he told me now felt like another brick in the foundation of my revenge. I spent the next few days making copies of everything I had collected. I put one set in a safety deposit box, and another with a trusted friend who lived out of state. I told her only enough to make her understand the importance of keeping them safe. I also began to discreetly gather information about our finances that even the lawyer had not asked for yet. I found accounts he had opened without my knowledge small. Transfers that added up over time, payments to names I did not recognize. I documented every single one. At night, when he was asleep, I would sometimes stand by the bedroom window staring out into the dark and thinking about the day it would all come to light. I imagined the shock on his face when he realized I had known for so long. I imagined the silence that would follow when everyone around him saw the truth laid bare. I knew that moment would come, but I also knew it had to be at the perfect time. One evening, he mentioned a business trip scheduled for the end of the month. He spoke about it casually as if it were routine, but I knew instantly that this was going to be another trip with her. I asked small questions, pretending to be concerned about the timing and whether he would be safe traveling. He reassured me with that fake warmth in his voice, and I smiled back, knowing that this trip might be the key to setting everything in motion. The following week, I received another call from the investigator. He confirmed that my husband had booked the hotel in the same city as his supposed conference and that the reservation again listed 2 guests. This time, I told the investigator to focus on gathering as much proof as possible during that trip. I wanted it all: the photographs, the videos, the timestamps, every shred of evidence that could not be argued against. Each day leading up to his departure felt heavier and yet sharper, like the edge of a blade being honed. I kept my routine normal, laughing when I had to cooking his favorite meals, packing his bags for the trip. I kissed him goodbye at the door and watched him drive away with the same calm expression I had perfected. Then I closed the door and let out the breath I had been holding. This was the beginning of the end, and he did not even know it. The night after he left for the so-called business trip, I sat at the kitchen table with a single lamp on, casting a small pool of light over the stacks of papers, photographs, and notes spread out in front of me. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, each second pulling me closer to the moment everything would finally unravel. I thought about the years I had spent believing in him, defending him even against my own doubts. I thought about how easily he had looked me in the eye and spun lie after lie, and how I had taken those lies into my heart because I wanted to believe in us. That person I used to be no longer existed. The investigator had already sent me a few preliminary updates. He had followed my husband and the other woman from the airport to a hotel, where they checked in together. Just as I had predicted, he had captured photographs of them holding hands in the lobby and then disappearing into the elevator. I stared at the images for a long time, memorizing every detail: the way her hand rested on his arm, the way he bent slightly toward her as if she were the center of his world. I thought about how that used to be me and how he had taken that away without a second thought. I decided that night that my revenge would not be a loud explosion, but a slow, precise dismantling of everything he thought was safe. I began drafting letters to his business partners, letters that would be sent only when the moment was right. Each letter contained carefully chosen words and attached photographs, proof that could not be denied. I knew that if I sent them too early, he might find a way to twist the story, but if I waited until I had even more evidence, the damage would be absolute. Over the next 2 days, the investigator sent me more proof photographs of them, dining together, laughing over drinks, walking through the city with their arms linked. He even managed to record short videos where their voices were clear enough to hear snippets of conversation. They spoke of weekends spent together in other cities, of plans for the future, as if I had already been erased from his life. My chest burned as I listened, but my mind remained sharp. I was collecting weapons, and every word they spoke was another bullet. When he called me from the trip, his voice was smooth and practiced. He told me about the conference, how productive the meetings had been, how late the dinners ran. I played my role perfectly, asking about his schedule and telling him how quiet the house felt without him. He responded with false affection, and I let it wash over me like harmless rain, knowing it no longer touched me. Every lie he spoke was already in my possession, documented alongside the truth. The night before he was scheduled to return, the investigator met me in the same diner where we had first spoken. He slid another envelope across the table. This one was heavier, thicker. Inside were more photographs, more records, including hotel receipts with both names listed. I could feel my pulse in my throat as I sifted through them. The investigator watched me quietly and finally asked if I was ready to use what I had. I told him not yet. I wanted more than just proof of the affair. I wanted to show the world the depth of his betrayal, the way he had built an entire second life while pretending to be mine. When my husband returned, he walked into the house with the easy confidence of someone who believed he was untouchable. He kissed my cheek and unpacked his suitcase, telling me about the presentations and the contacts he had made. I nodded at all the right times, poured him a drink, and asked if he was tired. He smiled in that way that used to make me feel safe and now only made my stomach turn. I watched him from across the room and thought about the clock ticking, down to the moment he would understand just how wrong he had been. In the following weeks, I began to quietly pull myself out of our shared life. I transferred small amounts of money into an account only I could access. I contacted a lawyer, but kept the initial meetings brief and vague until I was ready to present the full case. I started moving my personal belongings to a storage unit under the pretense of decluttering the house. I did all of this without changing my behavior around him, not giving him a single reason to suspect that I was planning anything. Then one evening as he showered, I slipped into his office and went through his desk drawers. I found a folder with more receipts and printed emails between him and the other woman. They wrote to each other as if they were partners in every sense, discussing trips and finances, even small arguments about what they would do together on certain weekends. I took photographs of everything and replaced the folder exactly as I found it. My hands shook as I left the room, not from fear, but from the rush of knowing. I was holding the last pieces of the puzzle. The picture was almost complete, and all that remained was to decide exactly how and when I would bring it all crashing down on him. I wanted the timing to be perfect, a moment that would strip away every ounce of control he thought he had. A moment where he would see not just me, but everyone around him knowing the truth. There would be no coming back from it, no way to repair the image he had so carefully built. I went to bed that night with my plan almost ready, the weight of it settling over me like a calm, steady heartbeat. I knew he would never see it coming. The morning after I finalized the last pieces of my plan, I woke before dawn and sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the shadows on the wall. I could hear his steady breathing behind me, and for a moment, I wondered how many mornings I had sat in that exact spot, believing that we were building something together, believing that the man sleeping next to me loved me without question. The thought made my chest ache, but not from sadness. It was something colder, more solid. It was the weight of truth pressing down on me and telling me there was no going back. Over the next week, I carried out my routine with perfect precision. I made breakfast. I asked him about his day. I laughed at his jokes and listened as he told me about work, never letting on that I already knew every detail of his secret life. He had no idea that while he was away at the office, I was in constant contact with the investigator, reviewing photographs and receipts, planning exactly how I would deliver the truth to the right people at the right time. I spent hours at the lawyer's office quietly going over the financials. The accounts, the assets, the investments, all laid out in black and white. The lawyer was careful to explain what could be divided and what I was entitled to. And with every piece of information, my plan became sharper, more lethal. I was not only going to take myself out of his life, I was going to make sure he could never recover from the consequences of what he had done. The investigator brought me more evidence than I thought possible. Hotel bookings in different cities. Airline tickets for 2, even a rental property lease under her name, but paid for with our joint account. It was all there, an unshakable wall of proof. Each time I added a new piece to the growing collection in my folder, I imagined the look on his face when he realized how deep the damage would cut. He thought he was untouchable. He thought I was still in the dark. That illusion would be his undoing. I started creating a list of people who would receive the evidence when the time came. His business partners, his close friends, his family, even the community, organizations he proudly supported. Each envelope would contain a neat collection of photographs, receipts, and transcripts of conversations. Each one tailored to show them exactly who he really was, not a devoted husband, not a loyal partner. Not the man they thought they knew. At home, I played the part so well it almost frightened me. I sat across from him at dinner asking about his day while my mind raced ahead to the moment I would watch everything fall apart. He still kissed me goodbye in the morning and told me he loved me before bed, and I still smiled and whispered it back. The words meant nothing now, but I said them because they were part of the mask, and the mask was what kept him blind. One night he came home later than usual and claimed he had been stuck in traffic. I knew exactly where he had been because the investigator had sent me a picture, less than an hour earlier, of him and her leaving a restaurant together, their hands brushing as they walked close enough to look like lovers, but careful enough not to be obvious in public. I smiled when he told me about the supposed traffic jam and even offered to make him a late dinner. He accepted without hesitation, completely unaware that I could see straight through him. The day I had been waiting for finally took shape in my mind. It would be his company's annual gala, a grand event with hundreds of people from his professional and social circles gathered. In one place, he would be surrounded by the people whose opinions mattered most to him, the people who thought of him as a respectable man. I would attend, of course, dressed in the gown he had complimented weeks Before, when I bought it, I would stand beside him, smile for photographs, and wait for the moment when the envelopes I had prepared would be delivered quietly to every important person in the room. In the days leading up to the gala, I felt an odd sense of calm. My movements were deliberate, my words careful, every detail of my plan was checked and rechecked. I coordinated with the investigator. To ensure that the delivery would be timed perfectly, the lawyer prepared the initial documents for divorce ready to file the moment the news broke. By the time the gala ended his life as he knew it would be over, the night of the event, I watched him from across the room as he charmed guests and shook hands. His smile was wide, his laughter loud. He looked like the man everyone admired, but I knew better. I felt the weight of the small clutch in my hand, holding my phone, waiting for the message that would confirm the envelopes had been delivered. I mingled with the crowd, accepting compliments on my dress and chatting politely, all while keeping my eyes on him. When my phone finally buzzed, I glanced at the screen and felt my pulse quicken. The message was short, just 3 words. It is done. I looked up and caught sight of the first guest pulling an envelope from their bag, their expression shifting from curiosity to shock. Then another and another. A ripple of confusion and disbelief spread through the crowd. The conversations grew quieter, the laughter faded, and the air seemed to grow heavier. He noticed the change almost immediately, turning his head from one group to another, his smile faltering. Then his eyes met mine, and in that instant I saw the first flicker of fear. The mask he wore for the world began to crack. He excused himself from the person he had been speaking to and started toward me, but he didn't make it far. Another guest intercepted him, holding up the photographs with a look of disgust. Others followed, their voices rising in anger and disbelief. The room that had once been filled with admiration now turned into a storm aimed directly at him. I stood still, my face calm, my heart steady, watching as everything I had planned unfolded exactly as I had imagined. The sound in the room shifted from confused whispers to sharp accusations, and it spread so quickly that he could barely keep up with the number of people coming toward him, holding the evidence in their hands. He tried to explain himself, but each attempt was drowned out by another voice demanding answers. I stood in place, my glass of champagne untouched, my expression calm while I took in the scene. Around me, people exchanged looks of betrayal, some shaking their heads, others stepping away from him, though his presence alone could stain them. I watched him glance toward me again as if searching for an ally, and I knew in that moment that he realized I had done this. His eyes were wide, his chest rising and falling faster than before. He tried to move toward me, but I turned away, taking slow, deliberate steps toward the edge of the room. I wanted him to feel the distance. I wanted him to understand that there was no safe place left for him here. The murmurs had grown into a low roar, and I could hear snippets of words, liar, cheat, fraud, echoing in the air like a chant. I made my way to the balcony where the night air was cool against my skin. I leaned on the railing and looked out at the city lights, letting the noise from inside fade to a dull hum. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my lawyer, confirming that the divorce papers had been filed and that the press would receive an anonymous tip about his misconduct before midnight. I typed back a single word, perfect, and slid the phone back into my clutch. Inside, the chaos grew louder, and I could hear the sound of chairs scraping against the floor, people gathering their belongings and leaving in groups. The gala was unraveling, and so was his carefully curated image. Every handshake he had relied on, every connection he had built was being stripped away one by one. I could almost feel the sting of each loss, as if I were right there in his mind, watching him panic. After a few minutes, I stepped back inside and saw him standing near the center of the room, surrounded by a small knot of people who were clearly not offering comfort. His tie was loosened, his hair slightly out of place, and his voice carried the desperation of a man who knew he was losing everything. The woman he had been seeing was nowhere to be found. She had likely slipped out the moment the first envelope was opened, leaving him alone to face the mess was the one choice she made that I almost respected. I walked past him slowly, and for a brief second our shoulders brushed. He turned toward me, his mouth opening as if to speak. But I didn't stop. I didn't even look at him. My heels clicked against the floor, and the sound seemed to echo louder than anything else in that room. I headed straight for the exit, feeling the weight of months of planning finally lift from my shoulders. Outside, the cool night air wrapped around me, and I could hear faint shouts from inside the venue. I signaled for a cab, and as I waited, I thought back to the night I first suspected him of cheating. I remembered the ache in my chest, the sleepless hours, the self-doubt, and the endless questions. Now those memories felt distant, almost like they belonged to someone else. Someone weaker, someone who still believed his lies. I had become someone else entirely, someone who knew her own strength and her own worth. The cab pulled up and I slid inside, giving the driver my address. As we pulled away, I caught one last glimpse of the building in the side mirror. The bright lights of the gala still shone through the windows, but they no longer looked warm or inviting. They looked harsh and cold, like the truth itself. I imagined him standing there watching me leave, knowing he could never reach me again. Not physically, not emotionally, not in any way that mattered. When I got home, I placed the folder of evidence on the kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of wine. I sat at the table in the quiet of my own home, and for the first time in months, I felt completely at peace. There was no need for more confrontation, no shouting match, no final words. The silence was enough. It said everything that needed to be said. By the time I finished my drink, my phone was buzzing constantly with messages from mutual friends, some offering support, others demanding to know what had happened. I ignored them all. I had no intention of explaining myself to anyone. The truth was in those envelopes and in the fallout that would follow him for years to come. He had chosen his actions, and now he would live with the consequences without my presence to shield him. I turned off my phone, set the empty glass in the sink, and went to bed. The city outside was quiet, and in that stillness, I knew I had not just taken revenge, I had taken back my life. And no matter how many times he replayed the events of this night in his mind, there would be nothing he could say or do to undo what I had set in motion. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a pale glow over my bedroom, but I felt no rush to get out of bed. I lay still for a while, listening to the faint hum of the city outside, my window letting the events of the previous night replay in my mind piece by piece. There was no guilt in me, not a flicker of regret, only the deep, steady satisfaction of knowing that I had chosen the exact moment and the exact way to dismantle him, and it had worked perfectly. When I finally rose, I made coffee and sat by the window, sipping it slowly while scrolling through the news on my tablet. The headline on the local page made me pause. Businessman's reputation crumbles after allegations surface inside gala. There was a photo of him from last night. His suit wrinkled, his face pale, and his eyes carrying that lost, desperate look I had seen when I walked past him. Every detail in the article matched the evidence I had provided, and while it did not mention my name, it was clear enough to anyone who knew the truth. The comment section was flooded with people debating whether the allegations were real, but I knew the tide had already turned against him. Once a crack appeared in his perfect image, it would spread until the whole thing collapsed. His business partners would distance themselves, his clients would start pulling out, and the woman he thought he could build a life with would be gone just like she vanished last night. I could almost see him pacing in his apartment, phone in hand as call after call went unanswered. Around noon, my lawyer called to update me. The divorce proceedings were moving faster than expected, thanks to the public nature of the scandal, and the property division would heavily favor me given the evidence I had documented. I thanked her briefly and hung up, returning to my coffee, now cold on the table. I took another sip anyway, letting the bitterness sit on my tongue. It matched the flavor of what I imagined he was feeling right now. By mid-afternoon, the texts from mutual acquaintances had shifted from shock to curiosity. Some of them wanted to know how I had done it, others tried to disguise their nosiness with faux concern. I answered none of them. My silence was part of the plan, too. It left space for their imaginations to fill in the gaps, and the less I said, the more power I held over the narrative. In their minds, I was not just the betrayed wife. I was the woman who had calculated her every move and executed it flawlessly. Later that day, I decided to go out for a walk. The air was crisp and cool, and each step away from my apartment felt like shedding another layer of the past. I stopped by a small bookstore and browsed the shelves, letting the scent of old paper and ink wash over me. There was something about being surrounded by stories that reminded me my own was far from over. This was just a chapter, and I had the power to write the rest without him. When I got back home, the phone was still buzzing occasionally, but I ignored it. I made dinner for one, enjoying the quiet simplicity of cooking for myself without the constant undercurrent of tension that had once filled this kitchen. I plated the food, carefully lit a candle, and sat down to eat, savoring each bite as though it was a ritual in reclaiming my space. That night before bed, I opened a drawer in my nightstand and took out the small box where I had kept all the pieces of evidence against him: old receipts, hotel confirmations, messages I had printed out. I looked at them one last time, and then carried the box to the fireplace. I set it down, lit a match, and watched as the flames consumed each paper, curling the edges black and turning the lies into smoke. As the last ember died out, I felt lighter, It was not just about revenge anymore. It was about closure, about knowing that I had taken control in a way that left no room for him to ever touch my life again. He might still try to reach out in the weeks to come, maybe even try to twist the story in his favor, but I had already taken the most important thing from him, his power over me. I went to bed with the faint scent of smoke still lingering in the air, and for the first time in years, I slept through the night without waking in the dark, wondering where he was or who he was with. My life was mine again, and tomorrow I would begin deciding what to do with it, without the shadow of his betrayal hanging over. The morning after the fire of the past finally burned itself to ash, I woke with a strange stillness in my chest. The air felt different, almost softer, as if the walls of my apartment had taken a deep breath along with me. I stretched under the sheets slowly, not with the heavy dread that used to greet me, but with a calm I had not known in years. I could hear faint traffic below my window and the distant sound of someone walking their dog, but inside my home it was nothing but quiet, and in that quiet I found a kind of strength that no amount of money or revenge could buy. I made tea instead of coffee, letting the steam rise into my face while I leaned against the counter. My phone lay on the table, flashing with missed calls. I did not need to check the names. I knew at least some of them would be his, the rest would be people who still thought I could be swayed into answering. They did not know that my silence was not temporary. It was a wall made of every night I had cried alone, every moment I had been made to feel small, and every second I had spent planning to take back my life. Later, I decided to step outside, not because I had anywhere urgent to be, but because I wanted to feel the world without the weight of him pressing into my thoughts. The city seemed brighter somehow. The sun caught in the glass of tall buildings, making them shine like they were new. A man in a suit brushed past me, muttering into his phone, and for a second it reminded me of how he used to be, always rushing, always convinced that his next deal, his next meeting, his next woman was the thing that mattered most. I smiled at the thought that maybe he was rushing somewhere now too, but for reasons that were not as grand. A few blocks away, I stopped at a cafe I had never been to before, the kind with small tables close together and handwritten menus on chalkboards. The waitress had a tired smile, but it was real, and when she brought me my food, she asked if I wanted more tea, as though she had all the time in the world. That was something I had not experienced in so long. The feeling of being seen without any agenda, no manipulation, no performance. It was just life in its simplest form, and I realized how much of it I had missed while living in the shadow of someone who cared more for his own reflection than for the people around him. When I finished eating, I wandered into a park. The grass was damp from an earlier rain, and children were chasing each other between the benches, their laughter carrying across the open space. I sat down and let the sound fill me. Somewhere deep inside, I knew I could rebuild from here, not in the way of starting over completely, but by piecing together all the parts of me he had tried to erase. My independence, my trust in myself, my ability to find joy in small moments. Back at home, I spent the afternoon sorting through old boxes. There were photographs, letters, and gifts, all from a time when I still believed him. I touched each one briefly before placing it in a pile, for donation or for the trash. I kept nothing that tied me to his version of our story. This was my rewrite, and it did not need his face in it. The act was slow and deliberate, like clearing weeds from a garden. I could almost see new space opening up for things I had not yet imagined. As the days passed, the news around him grew darker. His company issued a statement distancing itself from him. Rumors of investigations began to swirl, and his name appeared in articles that no longer called him a respected figure, but a liability. I never spoke a word to confirm or deny anything. I simply watched from a distance as the image he had built with such care crumbled in front of everyone he had once tried to impress. One evening, I received an envelope in the mail with his handwriting on it. I held it for a long time without opening it, just feeling the paper. Between my fingers, it was heavy in a way that had nothing to do with weight. When I finally tore it open, there was a single page inside. His words were scattered across it, uneven and shaky. He wrote about how he had lost everything, about how no one would speak to him, about how he wished he could undo it all. He did not say he loved me. He did not apologize. He only spoke about his own pain, and in that moment I understood that even now, even stripped of everything, he was still incapable of seeing beyond himself. I folded the letter neatly and set it in the fireplace without reading it again. The flames curled around the edges, and for a moment the paper glowed before turning black and breaking apart into embers. I stood there until it was gone, until there was nothing left but heat and the faint smell of burnt ink. Weeks turned into months, and my life began to take a new shape. I started a small project of my own, something that had nothing to do with him or with revenge. It was a community art program for kids in the neighborhood. The first day I opened the doors, they came running in carrying sketchbooks and paints, and their laughter filled the space in a way that healed parts of me I did not know were still raw. This was the kind of legacy I wanted to build, one that lifted instead of destroyed. Every now and then someone would mention his name in passing, or I would overhear a conversation about the scandal, but it no longer felt like a wound. It was simply a fact, a closed chapter in a book I had already finished. I could look at it without flinching, without feeling the urge to explain myself or defend my actions. I had done what I needed to do to free myself, and that was enough. One night, I sat on my balcony watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The air was cool and quiet, and I thought about how strange it was that life could be so heavy for so long and then suddenly so light. I remembered the girl. I had been before him, full of hope and fire, and I realized she had not been lost after all. She had just been waiting for me to come back for her. I went inside and closed the door behind me, not to shut anything out, but to keep the warmth in. This was my home, my life, my future, and there was no room in it for the ghost of a man who had once tried to control every breath I took. The silence that surrounded me now was not emptiness. It was freedom, and it was mine to fill however I chose.